Well, I'm thrilled to welcome the Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives, the Honorable Joe Straus, to the University of Texas, and particularly to the College of Liberal Arts. We know that this is a very busy time for you, Mr. Speaker. We very much appreciate your willingness to be here to carry on this conversation with Jim Henson. Speaker Straus needs very little introduction to this audience. He was elected by his colleagues to preside over the Texas House of Representatives in 2009 and re-elected for the job this past January by a wide margin. One might be forgiven for wondering just how happy he should be about being chosen as Speaker again. He is charged with leading the House through the worst budget situation in memory, with managing the combination of chess game and cage match that is the redistricting process, and managing a level of partisanship in the legislature, particularly in the House, that is unprecedented in modern Texas history. But he did take the job again and has managed it with an air of equanimity that makes him seem immune to the storms raging around him. Perhaps we'll learn about how he managed to do this today. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Joe Straus.
Thank you. Nice introduction. Thank you very much. Can we sit? Where do you want me?
One chair over.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Well, thanks a lot for doing this.
Sure, a pleasure. Glad to be out of the Capitol and get a little sunshine on the way over.
Well, you're getting some sunshine now, but we really appreciate it. Randy mentioned your equanimity in a way, and I can't help but start by saying I was watching the final throes of the budget debate Sunday night, and you were on the dais. You seemed almost preternaturally relaxed, even sort of smiling, even a little bit of laughter at a time when a lot of people seemed they were about ready to drop. How did you feel at the moment?
Well, I guess by Sunday night, and I have to mention that Chairman Jim Pitts, seated over here, and Chairman Todd Hunter are with me today, and with a strong team of pros in the House, it's easy for me to be relaxed. And Chairman Pitts did a masterful job of passing the budget through the Texas House with 98 votes. Took 76, he got 98. So why shouldn't I smile? He did a great job, and I think also by Sunday night we had already had quite a bit of debate. Hundreds of amendments had been discussed. We've been working on this budget for over a year, and so I was very confident in the outcome, and I could see by that time that the tone of the debate, even though there were strong disagreements along the way, as there always are, the tone of the debate was civil and respectful. And so I was very much at ease with where we were and how the House budget was progressing.
So you were pleased with the process, even?
Very pleased with the process. More pleased with the process than with the product, really. And the process lives on. It moves on, and it's a very natural cycle that we're going through. This session of the legislature is a session where the budget begins in the House. We alternate between the House and the Senate. And so we put in a lot of work. And Chairman Pitts and the 27 members of the Appropriations Committee have done a remarkably good job.
Well, let's talk about the budget then. I want to touch on some other things, but since we're on that, the budget comes in at about $164.5 billion, probably give or take, with a $12.3 billion.
Mostly take.
Mostly. Sure. With a $12.3 billion reduction in spending. Now, beyond the fact that it's through the process, how satisfied are you with the bill and the priorities reflected in it?
Well, I'm satisfied that the House has said its piece. I'm satisfied that the House has worked very well under some tough constraints this time. I mean, I don't think it's any mystery to the public that we're living under some difficult fiscal times. And over a year ago, before the election, when the House was only 76 to 74 in the partisan makeup, we discussed, and Chairman Pitts and I decided, that we should develop a budget going forward that we knew was going to be very tight, and that we should not spend money that didn't exist, that we shouldn't raise taxes when we're hopefully at that time, hopefully becoming going on the path to recovery. And so keeping our focus and keeping a very disciplined approach all through the way, that's what we produced, was a disciplined, no new taxes budget that spends only money that the comptroller says is available.
Now, given that, there's an assumption that there's going to be at least a couple of other chapters to this, given what happens in the Senate. I want to get your reactions to a few of the ideas that are floating around in the Senate right now, and some of them are very fresh. I assume that you were watching the Twitter feed. I hear it on the way over here. There's key, at the top level, key senators are talking about wanting to add about another $10 billion. Right?
Pausing for laughter?
Well, is there a way to do this that's not DOA in the House?
I don't know. I'm very open-minded to what they have in mind. We did our part, and we did it very well, in a very disciplined way. But if they have ideas that we should look at, well, I don't rule anything out before I see it. But I'm a little short on specifics over there. We've been very focused on getting our budget out, and that is part of the process. The initial part of the process is sending them a bill that they can work with. And there's a give and take from here to the end of the session.
Chairman Ogden had a proposal that was floating in the papers this morning that would cap state spending on school property tax breaks that are used by localities to attract and incentivize business. Does that sound like something that would have traction in the House?
I don't know. I have to see it. I'm sure there are a lot of ideas out there. There's some ideas in the House, too. Chairman Pitts has some ideas that were not for inclusion in this budget, but things that we've been through before when we've had tough budget cycles. So this House budget isn't the final document, but it was a very good, disciplined first step.
You've used the term discipline a couple times. I mean, how much of that discipline do you think came from the structural presence or the structural effect of the freshmen, that many of whom ran on, shall we say, fairly disciplined platforms?
Well, let me repeat what I said earlier, which is this budget process was laid out by Chairman Pitts and myself way before the election occurred, when it was a very close partisan split. I mean, our principles haven't changed in the House. The conservative majority of the House was strengthened. So did it make it easier to pass a disciplined budget that didn't raise taxes? Yes. But did the strategy and did the approach that we decided on change? No, not at all.
Yesterday, Senator Patrick, and then this, just a little while ago, apparently, Senator Ogden have both talked about this notion of a structural deficit and doing something about the margins tax. There have been a couple of different things floated around on there. I know that when you talked to Evan Smith in the Trib Live talk, the notion of a structural deficit came up. And I think the way you answered that was to say, as we've worked through the process, we're kind of getting our heads around that notion. Has your thinking evolved on that? Do you think there's any chance of revisiting that notion of what to do with the margins tax in the House?
I don't think in the next 54 days that there's much chance of that. I do think on day 55 and after there could be. We only have a short window of time to write a 2-year budget. I think we're making enormous progress in doing that. But the question about long-term fiscal stability in the state's a very good one. It's one that we're going to have to focus on once we get our work done this session. But it is a discussion worth having, and we will have it.
Do you think that's something that gets done in the interim, or?
Most likely, yeah, I think so. It's not something you want to do hastily because there's so many implications when you start tinkering with taxes on business and our employers and our drivers of economic growth and success in this state. So it's something that has to be thoughtfully done, and it's not just the margins tax. I think you have to take a look at what services Texas government decides to provide and how much we can afford and how we're going to pay for them, who's willing to pay for it.
I want to ask you one more question about the environment in which this took place. There was an odd situation in the Appropriations Committee a couple of weeks ago when the governor's reps were representatives were arguably no-shows at an appropriations hearing. And then there were last-minute negotiations the following day on the use of, or it looked from the outside anyway, maybe you can correct me, negotiations on the use of the rainy day fund for this year, for this current year's budget shortfall that did seem to actually impact what would happen for the next biennium. Now, one of the metaphors that recurred a lot in the budget debate in the last, or over the weekend, was the sense that people felt boxed in to the situation, physically boxed in. Now, allowing for the fact that we do have checks and balances, et cetera, how big a role was the governor's political position on this serving to constrain the legislature on both sides?
You're talking about on the rainy day fund and the use of
on the rainy day fund and overall on the budget, on revenue, sources of revenue?
Well, just going back to the use of the rainy day fund to balance our budget for the fiscal year we're in right now, which I don't think the public largely understood. We were, what, Jim, close to $5 billion short, $4.3 billion short of making ends meet by the end of the summer.
Yeah, there was a now problem.
And we had cut the members of the LBB that Jim's a member of and others, and the governor, lieutenant governor, and I had worked very hard over the last year or so to institute cuts in the current budget. And we called for a 5% reduction from agency spending and then an additional 2.5%. We left out some of the fundamentally important programs like the Foundation School Program and some other health and human services that we thought was appropriate to leave outside of this reduction effort. But that saved about a little over $1 billion, leaving us another $4.3 billion short. And we asked the governor and his staff and anyone to come to our aid with suggested further cuts to get us through this this year. And when the governor's budget folks showed up, they came out and they laid out some cuts that totaled about $800 million, I think it was. I can't remember the exact number. It's close to that, I think. But they weren't new cuts. They were work that had already been done. And so there was very little in the way of additional cuts. And I think that once the governor understood that we had that much room to make up in this budget year, they took a more realistic view of spending some of the rainy day fund. I think it was about a third of the rainy day fund to balance our budget this year to pay our obligations we had already incurred. This was not about a budget going forward. This was paying for our obligations and our what would be debts in this current year. And so it was managed very well, I think, by the House, and we got through that, and the House overwhelmingly, and House Bill 4 and House Bill 275, before we got to the House Bill 1, the budget for the next 2 years, I think balanced our budget using, I think in a responsible way, some of the rainy day fund to do that.
And so do you think it's a dead letter going forward?
The governor said he wouldn't sign a budget using more rainy day fund money, and I don't think the House is at this point open to it. But we'll see what it's really. The ball has now shifted over to the Senate, and it's not so much what will the House do. We don't have anything. We don't have anybody to negotiate with yet. Let's let the Senate do its work, and then we'll get together and work it out the way we always do. Do you have any expectation that they'll want to get into the rainy day fund? I mean, you left them out of that equation. I don't know what they're going to want to do. I mean, they're talking about $10 billion of additional spending. I don't know where they're going to find that.
Seems hard to imagine them doing that without it, to some degree, right?
It could be. I really don't know what they're thinking. I'm not being evasive here. I really don't know, and I want to give them a chance to do their work, and then we'll get together and discuss it. Another point that's made a lot in the discussion over the state's fiscal situation and
the positions taken by a lot of House members, particularly in the context of very, cuts that everybody admits are painful to some degree, is that this is what the voters were asking for. We've done some polling here in the UT Tribune poll that I'm sure, most people have seen, I'm sure you've seen, that shows, kind of a divided opinion, a certain split personality among voters who say, don't raise my taxes, but don't cut my services. We've also seen, though, a little bit of movement from the campaign season to the governing season, in which people, the more concrete you get about cuts, they get more negative about it. Not a lot so far, but we'll see where they are next month. Do you have any sense that you might do what you think the voters wanted and then find that once the ideas became concrete, they might change their minds?
Well, it's natural for politicians to try to do what the voters want us to do. And if we're sent conflicting signals, it's confusing for us. But I don't think there should be any confusion about one thing, and that's beyond the Texas budget. If you look at the federal budget, the message was sent loud and clear that deficit spending and a completely undisciplined, bloated government is with trying to fund unsustainable programs is over. And that was the message sent, I think, by the election. It trickles down to state government too. And we are, I think, I've used the term disciplined, but I would say we are very cautious with our budgeting in Texas and have always tried to be. But to your point about the public not wanting services cut, well, of course we don't want services cut. We want more transportation spending. We want to take care of our infrastructure. We want to make sure that our schools are funded well. We want to make sure that higher education is advancing the way we want it to. We want to take care of our most vulnerable citizens. All of those things are things that Republicans and Democrats want to see done. But I think that the signal that we've heard as Republicans and fiscal conservatives is you do what you can do, you do it efficiently, and you don't overspend. You don't spend money you don't have. The federal government has given all government a bad rap. They have been completely undisciplined and have had no ability to rein in some of the entitlement programs that I think the Republicans in the U.S. House are finally taking a serious approach for. And it may not be very popular with the public, but these days and these times at the federal level and really around the world fiscally, if you look at other countries, Greece and Ireland and maybe Japan, these are times that require some approaches to government that may not be very popular in the short term.
Although it's hard to see Texas as quite as bloated as the federal government in terms of the magnitude of cuts.
Right. We've been careful. We've been cautious over the years, and we will continue to be, so that we aren't in a situation like Ireland's not a wonderful place. Love to be there, but we're going to manage our affairs very carefully and prudently, and Texans are an innovative population. We'll be able to deal with this the way we've dealt with problems in the past, in the recent past. In 2003, we were able to get through a rough patch. We've had problems in decades past with energy crises and world wars and depressions, and so Texans will survive. We're innovators and we're survivors and we're risk takers and we're people that don't accept failure.
Well, do you think then that if a budget passes that is closer to where the House is, say, even say the Senate finds another $10 billion, we're still looking at a decent amount of cutting of existing programs, right?
I'm not so sure about that.
Or at least a slowing of growth, shall we say.
Yeah, well, Texas is growing, and it does cost more money to provide services to a growing population. I'm not sure exactly where the break-even point is on current services. But it's not gloom and doom. I mean, we passed a frugal budget, no doubt about that. I think there may be ways to negotiate with the Senate later and maybe find some common ground somewhere. I hope so. But it's not gloom and doom. We will survive this. I do think there is concern going forward, though, that if we can find a way, and I think we will, through this next 2-year budget cycle, we need to have a serious discussion immediately about the next 2 years, because that's fundamentally, I think, the next phase of this, is to look long-term in Texas and to look at some of the things that we are ignoring now, transportation infrastructure and water development for our growing population areas. So we're not done here, even if we can put this budget together that gets us through the next 2 years. We still have some long-range thinking and planning to do.
You think taking the stimulus money last time just put off that discussion?
Well, it made it easier. I remember the first day I was serving as speaker, the first question that the media asked me at my door had something to do with about a $6 billion shortfall. It surprised me. May not have taken the job if I had known that.
Congratulations.
But, so the stimulus program came along, and by the way, the stimulus is an ingenious term. Whoever came up with that, I wish was working for me, because it really wasn't meant to be a stimulus program. It just helped sell it. What it was let's keep these states afloat program. Texas wasn't in as serious a predicament as other states were, but because we do pay federal taxes, we were eligible to receive some of the funding. And so we were able to plug holes intelligently, at the same time reducing general revenue spending in our own Texas budget for the first time since World War II, I think. So I have fundamental problems with that stimulus program as a federal policy. But did it help us balance our budget last session? Yes, it did.
Yeah, whatever you called it, it was $16 billion.
Yeah.
Right.
Used, I think, mostly intelligently.
Okay, well, I suspect we'll come back to the budget and Q&A a little bit more, and it's hard not to talk about it with Chairman Pitts here. But we should talk about higher education a little bit for obvious reasons. Now, the funding cuts in HB 1 have some pretty significant cuts at this stage to state funding for higher ed. Reduces higher ed funding by about $600 million, again, give or take, with UT, for the people in the room, projecting about a $50 million hit. The other thing has got a lot of attention in that budget. 59,000 fewer students would get Texas grants under the House budget through the next biennium. Is there any will in the House to ameliorate that, you think?
Oh, I think there is. Absolutely there is. And how we're going to do it, I'm not quite sure yet, but Texas grants and for the private schools in Texas, the TEG program is very, very popular in the House. So those are things that I'm sure will be priorities if we get to the point where we can free up some other money or find ways to find some room to fund programs that are important to the members of the House, and those two are way up at the top of the list.
You know, we had our last guest was Chairman Branch, and we talked quite a bit about higher education. You know, I'm wondering what you think the kind of broader perspective on higher education is, because I think, particularly for those of us that work in the business, but I think also for students, it seems like higher ed in the state has been put in something of a vice. That is, on one hand, there's been a steady decrease in the amount of higher ed budgets, certainly at UT and at most institutions, that come from the state. On the other hand, there's increasing political pressure because of rising tuition. How is one supposed to negotiate that?
From your perspective or mine?
Well, I'm asking you, and I have a sense of what you may say to that, but.
Yeah, I mean, we do the best we can. Let me just make sure I get this in. I am a huge fan of your chancellor, Dr. Figueroa. He's a very good personal friend of mine. His most recent previous position was leading our UT Health Science Center in San Antonio, which is my hometown. We were very good family friends. And I think he's doing a terrific job running the system. President Powers, I think, does a great job for the University of Texas here. But to your point about higher ed funding, you know, I think the institutions have done a relatively good job, broadly speaking, of working through some times of fiscal constraint. Raising tuition is something that they've done that I haven't been a particular critic of. Others have been. You don't like it. You don't like it when tuition rises. I don't like it. But I think, you know, in some cases it's been necessary, and I don't think that they've been abusive, and I think it's unfortunate that it's been necessary, but it has been. And my understanding is that most campuses who have raised tuition, it's been largely because the students wanted to, because they wanted more services and more. There's been fees that have been raised, for instance, at UT San Antonio, UTSA, led by student. The students called for it. So I still think that an education at a UT system institution, bless you, is a relative bargain, and hopefully we can keep it that way.
You know, you're not really. That's not the only position on rising tuition, though, right? That in fact, there is a lot of criticism of rising tuition, and it.
Speaking for myself here.
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
You know, I guess the broader question, and this is.
And I didn't register a vote in favor of rising tuition, by the way.
No.
But it is understandable under certain circumstances.
You know, what do you think of the long term? If you look at some of the recent criticism and kind of out there in the ether of higher education in general, of its role in Texas, do you sometimes think? I mean, I'll put it this way: I sometimes feel that part of the problem in making the case is that there hasn't been a sustained case made for higher education by a broad swath of the leadership. I mean, you speak very well of it. You know, Chairman Branch, was very supportive. But I think there are times when there's a stream of thinking out there in the political culture that doesn't value higher education as much as you do.
That certainly isn't the case in the Texas House, which is the area that we're responsible for. And I would remind you, in the last session of the legislature, we passed groundbreaking Tier 1 funded research to bring up other campuses in addition to UT and A&M to Tier 1 status. That was one of our greatest accomplishments last session. So I think you may be referring to some of the stories that have been in the paper about separating research and trying to produce a low-cost
that would be an example.
Degree.
Sure.
I can't. That to me seems like unnecessary turbulence. It didn't come from the House of Representatives, and I don't think it reflects the thinking of the House.
Let's go on to something less controversial. How about redistricting?
Oh, great.
So have you seen any maps you liked?
Well, I've seen a map that includes room for 150 House members. Actually, I haven't even seen those maps, but we will soon. I know that Chairman Solomons is working hard and consulting with the members, and in the larger metropolitan areas like Bexar County, where I'm from, and Harris County and Dallas County and Travis County, I think the members have been working among themselves to try to come to a consensus in those areas. And in the rural areas, it gets a little tougher because of the changes in population and the results of the census. But we will work it out, and I feel at this point, I feel pretty confident we'll get a map passed.
What priorities guide you in the redistricting process?
Fairness, adherence to the law, and try to be reflective of what how the voters have situated us, probably in that order. If not legal first.
Well, legal one way or the other is going to come up, right?
It will.
There was a story in Politico this morning, and not that Politico is the end-all, but the story did raise some eyebrows and did echo things that I've heard sort of off the record in the last few weeks. that there's been a lot of infighting, in particular between Congressman Barton and Smith, and that this is sort of rippling through the Republican caucus a little bit. You picked up on that at all?
Well, let me say this, is I feel very qualified to make this comment, having been Lamar Smith's campaign manager in his first race for Congress in 1986, 85 and 86, when I was in my 20s. Seeing the word fighting and Lamar Smith in the same sentence just doesn't seem logical to me. So whether they have disagreements, maybe. We all have disagreements. But whether there's infighting, I can't really address that. But Lamar is a very, very capable politician. He's a very fine statesman. He's been a member of the United States House of Representatives now for 24 years. He's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. So I am certain that he has the skill set to work through whatever the issues are.
Do you think a map can be drawn with 4 new Republican congressional districts that will meet your legal criteria?
I don't know why it couldn't be, sure.
Okay. Have you made summer vacation plans?
Well, no, but not because of my legislative calendar.
Okay.
Because our 2 daughters are of an age where they're making independent plans, and so it makes it very difficult for the 4 Strauses to coordinate schedules, but we will. I really hope I'm not in Austin too much.
I think there's a lot of people that share that.
Yeah.
Not about you, but don't want to be here either. You know, I'll go back to redistricting for a beat. I'll let you off the hook on the I asked you too easy a question on the 4 seat.
No, I just gave you an easy answer. The question wasn't easy.
How hard is this going to be?
I think it's probably always hard.
Always hard,
It's
but-
always hard. Texas is growing a lot. That's why we have these 4 new seats. I would suggest to you that it's probably easier because we're growing. If we were constricting, I think it would be hard.
The conventional wisdom, and the conventional wisdom is often wrong, that in some
Always
ways,
wrong.
in some ways, Republican success in the last election, in the state level elections, actually made redistricting a lot harder for y'all in terms of preserving your Republican majority, the magnitude of your Republican majority, and protecting all of your incumbents in the process. Now, you didn't say protecting incumbents was one of your criteria, but
Well,
it often is a consideration.
oh, sure it is. Of course it is. I'm not sure exactly what the question was, but is it more difficult
yeah.
because we elected more Republicans?
Yeah, absolutely.
It could be, but again, I think it's more a matter of population shifts than it is how many Republicans or Democrats were elected.
I want to open it for Q&A in a minute here, but I want to wind up on a kind of more general question. You've had a somewhat unusual speakership, and I don't mean that as a veil. I mean, it's, you know, you were elected in what was essentially a pretty unusual, the product of what, you know, some would call kind of a rebellion against the seated speaker. Then reelected amidst what historically seemed to me to be an unusually public election for speaker. This is usually something that's the ultimate kind of inside baseball game. We had done some interviews for a project here on the election that resulted in Billy Clayton becoming speaker. Mm-hmm. And that was just, doing the research on that, that was an incredibly internecine, internal manner of really political allegiances.
Right.
And then here you are having what is essentially kind of a public battle waged among interest groups over your reelection. Can you give us a sense of what the job's been like? From the outside, it seems like a very unusual tenure and one that must be different, but just kind of a personal level, what's it been like to be speaker?
Well, I don't do anything
Right now.
the conventional or easy way. I mean, to me, it's been mostly a pleasure. What I've tried to do is to ensure a fair process in the House, to treat members, whether they be Democrats or Republicans, fairly and the same, and to try to build in the House a sense of collegiality. We can disagree. I mean, obviously we disagree. We're sent there to represent our districts, and my district in suburban San Antonio is going to be far different from from a West Texas rural district or a district down in the Rio Grande Valley, for instance. But it doesn't mean we can't conduct our affairs civilly and with the best interest of our constituents in mind. And I'm a believer in the process. I think if you treat people fairly, if you allow everyone the freedom to speak and to participate and to contribute, we work through our problems.
Sounds like you've liked it.
Well, and it's a challenge. And some people, I'm glad you didn't ask me if I'm having fun. That's the question I get at home a lot. And you know, I usually answer that question as, well, some days it's not fun, but it's always fascinating. And it's a real privilege to be able to do this job. And I have a lot of confidence in the other House members, especially the leadership team like Chairman Hunter and Chairman Pitts here, that make my job a lot easier.
Well, thanks a lot for coming. I want to open it for questions. Please give Speaker Straus a hand.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a microphone over here in the corner and then another one over here. So if you'll raise your hand in a way that I can see. Let's start right here. And please, so we can get as many people in, and the speaker has a pretty hard time he's got to leave. So please make your questions as succinct as possible.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for coming here today.
Where are you?
Right here.
Oh.
It kind of troubles me that the majority in the House is using their position to push ideological and non-substantive agendas. And I reference voter ID without reference to ballots and sonogram bill without exceptions for rape and incest, and also guns on campus, which is very important to me, without allowing schools to choose for themselves, as I've seen the majority of students and faculty are against concealed carry on campus. Do you feel that that's what's happening, that your House is pushing an ideological agenda, and do you agree with that?
Well, I think the House is considering bills that the governor has called emergency items. The guns on campus bill hasn't been considered by the House yet. I assume it will be at some point. The voter ID bill is a bill that's been on the floor of the House, I believe, every session that I've been here for, and either has passed the House or would have passed the House had it come to a vote every session that I've been here. The sonogram bill, the House voted for it 109 or 113 or something, you know, a huge majority supported it. So I'm not sure that you can ever eliminate bills that one person might say are ideologically driven. But there are 4,000 bills that have been filed this session, which I think is down some from what it normally is. You referenced 2 or 3 or 4. It's not all we do, but I think every session there are going to be agenda items of one faction or another that find their way to the floor and the people speak on them. May I just address just one more comment about the guns on campus thing? How many people in the room would support a campus carry bill? Not very many. Yeah, you guys don't. You members of the House don't get to vote today. You'll have your chance.
Thank you for coming to speak to us today, Mr. Speaker. Now, I have a question. What lessons have you and your colleagues learned since the 2003 redistricting crisis?
What lessons have we learned?
Yeah, what lessons have you learned heading into this new redistricting round?
Well, I wasn't here in 2003, so I'm not sure that I can address that question. But in the 2011 redistricting, I think that we've done a very good job. Chairman Hunter over here, during the interim, led that redistricting hearing process and traveled all over the state, gathered input from every portion of the state, and I think has done a very thorough job. And now Chairman Solomon, since we've been in session with the serious map drawing since the census was provided, I think has done a really good job. So I don't look back at 2003 and I wasn't here, but I don't really think of it in terms of how are we going to do it differently than we did in 2003. I think of it in terms of what are we going to do in 2011 that draws a fair map that reflects the population of Texas and the expression from last November, and does it in a fair and legal way.
Over here.
Anybody here from San Antonio? You had a few. Is there a Dan here? Last name Dan? My daughter said that her friend was going to be here. Never mind. Maybe you skipped class. Sorry.
Well, it seems like we've cut. It seems like we've cut like what we can cut, and we're getting into like a painful area where, you know, you're going to cut jobs and stuff that you don't want to. Have we gotten to the point where we're going to start looking at sources of revenue that we may have not looked at in the past, like gambling or kind of things that have social costs associated with them that we might not have looked at in the past?
Well, I think in the next 54 days, we're going to look at balancing our budget without accessing new revenue that are in the tax column. And on the gambling issue, I have a particular issue there. My family's been involved in horse racing and breeding and the racing industry for 80 years. And because of that personal involvement, I've recused myself from anything concerning gaming as it relates to at least racetracks. And so I don't even have conversations with people about it. Whether it's considered by the House or not, I doubt it. But we'll see. I mean, at some point, at some later date, maybe. But I don't see it in the near term. And I think the Lieutenant Governor has spoken, and Senator Duncan has spoken about that issue recently. I'm clearly not opposed to it, but also I'm clearly not engaged in that issue.
I want to follow up on that just a little bit. I mean, do you see if things get really tight, arson taxes and or increases in these kinds of sin taxes are essentially what you're talking about, drinking, cigarettes, et cetera. Is that the most
beer,
likely?
I'm on campus. You're going to get me to touch that one?
Well,
Unless things have changed.
Well, people would be more likely to pay it here probably without.
Maybe so.
I'll take that as a no.
I don't see it. I really don't. I don't think we're in the tax raising mode.
All right. Other question? I see no students. Oh yeah, over here. The reporter's almost jumped.
Thank you for coming.
They get that way.
So there was another article today I saw online about another murder on the border over in California. I was just wondering if you ever speak with the governor about what Texas as a state can do apart from the federal government to secure our borders better.
Yes, we've talked about that a lot. I know it's a real priority for this governor, and it is for the Texas House. We are somewhat limited in what we can do because of the resources of our state relative to thousands of miles of border with Mexico. The federal government has not met its responsibility in terms of border security, in my view. They started to make some baby steps that direction. I hope they continue it. I'm not confident that they will, but they need to. The state, through our limited budget in the last several years, has spent several $100 million to do what we can do with state resources to back up local law enforcement, and we will continue to do that. But is it an answer? Is it sufficient in the absence of federal action? I don't think so, but we will do what we can, and it is a priority of the governor's, and it is of mine, and it is of the Texas House.
Over here.
There were a lot of amendments passed to HB1, and I was wondering if there were any that stuck out to you as, I guess, what you think would be the best amendment and the worst amendment, as far as, I guess.
Well, I'm not. They don't elect me to say what's the best and the worst. That's dangerous territory for me. But I will pick one, that that caught my attention, and that was the amendment to shift money away from the Texas Commission for the Arts to another area of the budget. And that was an interesting one because so many members of the House failed to register a vote. That amendment actually was adopted, even though there was, I don't think, even close to a majority of the House that voted for it. I happen to be a passionate supporter of the arts and believe in the value of supporting the arts and the humanities and remembering our culture and our history in Texas that is unique. So that was one that I did not find to be terribly distinguished. But it was the will of those members of the House who decided to vote. So I'm not critical of the process, but that's one that, had I been voting, I would not have supported that.
That was also one of the more closely divided of the amendment votes, right?
Yeah, I think it came up relatively early, and our legs weren't quite under us yet.
Yeah, it was a little, well, let me follow up on the amendment process real quick then and ask you about what seemed to be an effective kind of parliamentary and legislative strategy that resulted in the sequence of amendments that shifted money away from family planning. That was something else that came out of the Senate, I think today or yesterday, a couple of members of the Senate saying that they would be looking to kind of strip that out of the Senate version of the budget bill. Did you think that was a good idea? Did you think the family planning, the shift out of family planning was a good substantive policy idea?
My focus and my goal was to make sure that we passed a budget that didn't spend money we didn't have. We decided what that number was. We passed a calendar rule to make sure that we didn't exceed that limit. Now, the priorities of the House in terms of how to spend those limited resources was really up to the body. So I didn't weigh in on that particularly or any other issue. I mean, I just gave you my personal opinion about the arts and some other things, but we'll work it out. And this isn't a new debate. This isn't unfamiliar territory for us, and we'll work it out in due time.
It seemed like that was fairly strategized by somebody, though. I mean, it was not a random number of amendments. If Senators Nelson and Duell, I think, are to prevail in stripping that out of the Senate, out of the Senate version, is that something you think will be a deal breaker?
You know, as I said, this isn't the first time that issue has come up, and we've been able to agree to budgets in the past, and I'm sure we will this time. I have to point out Samantha and Grace from my office are here. Thank you for providing some manpower to the Speaker's office, or woman power in this case.
Well, I've just met Samantha. Grace is a great student. I'm sure Samantha is too, but Grace is actually in the class. So
I knew Grace's mom when I was her age.
Grace, would you like to just stand up? Reporters, Ms. Brooks.
I didn't sign one of those consent forms, by the way, so I'm not sure this is...
You're on the record, Mr. Speaker. I've heard you say a couple of times that you're not in tax-raising mode. You're not going to, don't want to tinker with new tax codes or changing tax codes in a hurry. Can I just nail you down right here on whether you think the House would or you would support fixing or changing the business tax, as Dewhurst and Ogden seem to be pushing? Is that dead in the water this session, or is that still an option?
Well, I have to see what they have in mind specifically. What I was trying to indicate is that we are not of a mind in the Texas House to raise taxes. What they have in mind, I don't know. So I would be probably overstepping here to say that I oppose something or support something that I haven't seen.
Mr. Root?
I'd just like to follow up, Mr. Speaker, on what Karen was asking. As you know, House tax bills have to start in the House. Harvey Hildebrand, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, has said that he didn't see a tax bill coming out of his committee. Would you see a fix of the franchise tax, namely to apparently shore up the loopholes that are draining, I don't know, $2 billion or something a year, something like that? Is that something that you would be okay with coming out of the House, which would be required for that to be fixed?
Well, I'd say that Chairman Hildebrand said that he didn't see a tax bill coming out of his committee. He's been around a long time. I doubt that one's going to slip past him unnoticed. So I would say in the near term, I don't think that's going to happen.
One more, Ross Ramsey.
Do you think when you're on the floor of the House and they present bills like the family planning bills, is there any difference in the House, you know, in practical terms between family planning and abortion when the House is voting? I mean, it seemed to have conflated those two issues, and the votes against family planning or to strip those services seem to be taken as abortion votes by at least some part of the House.
I don't know the answer to that question. If they mean abortion, they should make that clear so that the members know what they're voting on. But I'm not certain how to answer the question other than to say I really don't know. And if they mean abortion, they should say that. And some of them probably did. I think on some of those amendment debates, they did make it clear. So I think that may be fair game.
I think with that, I want to actually thank Representative Hunter and Pitts for also coming by and issue an invitation here in front of God and everybody for you to please come and occupy the chair sometime. We'd love to have you. But most of all, I'd like to thank Speaker Straus for coming again, an extraordinarily busy time, and we really appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Thank you
Pleasure.
very much.
Be with you all.